All right, so welcome everybody. We are starting out this week's cafe with an intimate group, but knowing that others will watch this recording afterwards. So the topic that we had chosen for this week is what is unschooling, what is schooling, and what is unschooling school? I wanted to offer this topic as a way of opening up the cafe to any question whatsoever. I figured any question could fit within those three questions. But I did also want to share some thoughts about those, and just pull out my phone because I have the thoughts on there. So I wanted to begin with the idea of what is unschooling, because I think it's one of the most liberating concepts, most terrifying concepts, and most misunderstood concepts around homeschooling and schooling. Liberating because as soon as we start talking about homeschooling, we've moved away from the idea of should. We've moved away from mandatory curriculum. We've moved away from the idea that you should be reading by such and such an age, or you should have a high school diploma, or you should. All these shoulds that can have a really big impact on families and kids' lives. So that's kind of the liberating side of it. The terrifying side, of course, is as parents, if we're suddenly saying, okay, that whole school thing that we know so well, we're going to step aside from that and not oblige our kids into anything. That it opens up this huge gulf, and emptiness can be quite scary, because will our kids be okay? Will they be able to get a job? Will they be able to graduate if they want to? Will they be able to go to university? Will they have money? Will they ever move out? Will they find happiness? Will they always be that weird kid who doesn't go to school? All of the what ifs and all of the fear around not making sure that our kids are going to be okay is what often steps in to fill that void that stepping away from school can leave. So we're going to talk about a few of those things over the course of the session today. And I'm going to address them in the next section of what is schooling as well. So the other liberating piece that comes up with unschooling is this idea of trust. And I think maybe that's where it's often what brings us to unschooling, is a sense that we can trust our kids to find their way. We can trust that by following them completely, or more than we have been, or more than school has been, by following them, that's going to help us to help them to succeed, to have that happy life, that healthy life, that independent life. So this notion of bringing trust in and using it as something upon which to base decisions and upon which to base ways of being in our family is very particular to unschooling. I mentioned right at the beginning the idea that it's one of the most misunderstood things. And I think that's because so many people think, well, unschooling, okay, so you never make your kid do anything. They just do nothing if they want to. There's all of this nothingness and the sense of, well, it can't be very responsible to be an unschooling family. There's a wonderful Facebook group called Almost Unschoolers. And I think that name is really beautiful because it has the sense of, okay, unschooling is something that I'm really drawn to. It makes sense to me in some way, but I don't quite buy into the whole thing. And I love that group for the conversations that happen in there. I really want to be unschooling, but we really want to make sure our kid knows math, or whatever it is that is the but. Those conversations happen within the safety of a group that's called Almost Unschoolers. And I often like to offer the term self-directed learning when a family is using the term unschooling, but feeling this like, oh, push-pull of, I think self-directed learning it's emphasizing that idea that the child is directing and is leading the way. It still has the word learning in there, and it leaves space for the idea that you could self-direct learn yourself right into a school classroom because you're choosing it. So for me, when we start getting into unschooling, it really is coming back to that idea of what works for that child, that teen, that family. And that might wind up being a very conventional school for all kinds of reasons. Or it might wind up being radical unschooling, i.e., nothing imposed and no classes and no online anything and no obligations and no schedule, if that's what works for that child, or somewhere in between, most likely. So using that notion of self-directed learning to springboard us back into the idea of schooling. So I asked the question of what is schooling, because I think it's really important to examine what schooling is in our world, what it has been or might be in our family, and what we think, what are our assumptions or our beliefs around schooling that we might actually want to examine and potentially shift. And I'm going to start there, because with schooling, until we, for families whose kids are in school, until there's some need to question whether school is actually the best place for that child, we assume that going to school every year, doing your homework, getting good marks, getting your diploma, going to university, it's the guaranteed path to success. And it's fair to assume that, because everything is based around that. Most of us went to school. Most people are okay in school. Some people loved it. So we have that sense that school is the right, normal, usual kind of guaranteed path. And if we come to a situation where something shifts and we actually start asking ourselves, is it the right path for this child? That opens up a huge can of worms, because we think it's the only path, because that's what we're used to being told and what society mostly knows. So the first thing that's really helpful to do is to say, okay, I recognize that I've got school as a path to success very normalized in my brain. Let's see what I can do to get not school as a path to success normalized in my brain. Because if you have two options which both seem reasonable, it's very different than having one option which seems like everybody does it and it's like the usual way, and we can't do that. Yikes. So as much as possible, how can you normalize? What can you learn about not being at school so that you can be okay with the idea that you're stepping into this journey? And I'm going to give you a couple of links later on, but some of the ways to do that normalizing are co-ops, finding other people who are doing it, online, looking up unschool success stories. There's all kinds of websites out there. Unschoolers, this Facebook group I mentioned, Almost Unschoolers, unschooling Facebook groups. Judy Arnall has a book called Unschooling to University. Go to university websites and look up, how do you apply as a homeschooler? Sometimes that was like, because they might have all these obligations, but often it's much more open than that. The obligations are something we can talk about later. There's often a way around those too. But so that idea of normalizing not taking the school path, how do you start doing that for yourself and for your child? So that's where it can become an amazing opportunity to be with other home/unschoolers in co-ops or any kind of activity, because your child, your teen starts to see, oh, it's not just me. That can be really helpful. Another big piece around that idea of normalizing the two choices is the language that we use. So everybody knows what it is to be asked what grade you're in and you're looking forward to Christmas holidays. We all know that world. But when somebody says, what grade are you in or what school do you go to, and you're not in a grade and you don't go to a school, it can be a very uncomfortable moment as you try to figure out how the heck to answer that question. And when we're looking at older kids who've left high school, the only word we really have for that is dropouts. I'm a dropout. Like, that's not anything that anybody wants to be using to describe their experience, because it's almost like, I don't think there's anyone who's a dropout. I mean, there's so much behind every story of every person who's chosen to step aside from school. So if we can arm our kids and ourselves with language that comfortably and easily describes where we're at, again, that normalizes it. So when you're asked, what grade are you in? Oh, I'm actually a self-directed learner, can be said with confidence and with understanding. That might be all it is. What grade are you in? Oh, if I were at school, I would be in grade 10. I'm a self-directed learner. Do you want me to tell you about what I'm doing? I've got this really cool project on the go right now. So a little bit of, yeah, I can sort of answer your question. If I was in that world, I'm not. And let me tell you more about it, bringing the conversation on to the next place. To me, that's arming kids and teens with those types of answers has been one of the most powerful tools I found to create space for families to deschool, to catch their breath, to whatever it is they need to do before they can feel good and comfortable about their education path. Even if they've been at it for a long time, even if it's a family that's been homeschooling for 5 or 6 years, but they're still having those moments, finding different language, finding the ways to answer those questions can be very, very helpful. So I think that's everything I wanted to say about schooling. We can obviously talk more about it later as well. Oh, no, there was one other thing I wanted to say, which I forgot to write down. I wanted to mention that we think of school as where you go to get an education. So not being at school is like, okay, so you're getting an education somewhere else. And that's definitely a big piece of it, education. But school is also can be your culture, your community, your peer group, your sense of belonging. And finding those outside of school can be one of the biggest challenges. And it is probably one of the most common things that sends kids back to school. If they're in a context where they can't find that sense of belonging outside of school, it can be enough to send them back to school, but often with a very different mindset. They're going back because they know that they really valued and want that peer context. They're not so worried about all the academics anymore. They know why they're there, and it feels different. I just lost my train of thought. School. Nope, it's gone. It'll come back. Okay. So the other thing I wanted to recognize is that for people who've been at school and are no longer at school, there's often a very difficult reason and complex reason for why they're not at school. That may involve severe anxiety. It may involve trauma. It may involve depression. It may involve something just terrible that happened at school, or a continued feeling of not succeeding in whatever way it was. So school, not school, involves a process of healing. And that not school, beauty of the notion of unschooling is that it has a built-in ability to allow time to heal. And we often talk about that transition time as being deschooling, and it is. But moving towards something that's less, that's not so much school at home, allows continued space for that healing, for the rediscovery or first discovery of self and what's important to me as a person. Who am I? I don't need to be defined by school, by which grade I'm in, by which friend group I'm a part of. Am I cool? Am I not? I don't need to be defined in those ways anymore. So how do I define myself? Who do I choose to see myself reflected in? What do I want to create as my life? So that's a very important piece, is to allow that space, no matter how you wind up landing in terms of education, to allow that space. So bringing those together, which is what unschooling school as a term and as a concept attempts to do, is taking that idea of education belonging to ourselves, education being self-generated, self-motivated, and then seeing how you want that to look. So unschooling, self-directed learning may well be at home only. It might be at home and out in the community as an apprentice or having a job, at home, out in the community, doing some kind of co-op or homeschool group or whatever group you're finding. And wouldn't it be amazing if it could be knowing really clearly what you want and going to school to get the parts of school that you want? So if it's that peer group and you're really missing, I don't know, the indoor basketball league, wouldn't it be amazing if you could go to school, do basketball, and then leave? Wouldn't it be amazing if you could go to school for the months that you want to be there? And in winter, when you want to be out downhill skiing, go skiing instead. Or whatever it is that takes this notion of being self-directed, generating your own education, your own life, and school being one of the potential tools that you can access. It's very rare that somebody can participate in school in that kind of way. And the idea that Heather McTaggart, the founder of Unschooling School, had was, how do we get the idea out there? How do we normalize that schools, with all their amazing resources, like a bunch of adults who love kids and are passionate about sharing stuff? Wow. How do we get that accessible in a way that doesn't have to carry all the baggage that school typically carries with all the homework and all the assessments and evaluations? How do we make it flexible? So that's the majority of what I want to say in all of this, is really just this idea of understanding that we can generate our own education path and looking for how that best works for our family, and recognizing that there might be a way, and we want to work towards a way of having the school potentially be a part of it. That's one piece of it. That's that idea of unschooling school. All right. So what I do at this point is usually turn off the recording so that we can converse without having it recorded, in case people are wanting to share what's going on inside their families. I will just make a couple of notes. One is to say that this is our last cafe, obviously before the holidays, because it's only a few days until people are into holiday break mode. Our next cafe will be on January 17th, I believe, the Tuesday around the 17th. It will be back to its regular time of noon Eastern. And we will continue to ask the community for topics that are most of interest so that we can keep responding to those needs. We do have a mailing list that you can sign up for, and that's available through my Facebook group, through the Unschooling School Facebook group, and that allows you to get notifications of the upcoming cafes. And I will also mention that, so I host the cafe. I also work as an education consultant. So when families want to go into more depth with whatever's happening with their family, that's when I can come into the picture and offer a consultation. I also mentor teens on a regular basis to help them through that transition of stepping into their own learning a little bit more, their own lives, and then often to continue with them for a year, 2, 3 years, whatever it is, to help them to keep having that mentoring piece of their new life, their non-school life. So I want to share a couple of links just while the recording is still going. The first one is a lecture by Kate Robinson. She speaks about her own experience of leaving school at age 16 after being, quote, labeled hopeless, and what her experience was jumping into a life without school. So I highly recommend it, both for parents and teens and kids who would be interested. It's about 15 minutes long. It's sort of a TED Talk style. And the second one, it's not meant, I'm realizing it's a link to an actual bookstore. So apologies for that. I wish I had gone to the website and gotten it minus the bookstore link. Jim Flannery is a person who has done a lot of work in the unschooling field. He's got lots of interesting stuff out there. And I don't know what verb to use. He created a book that is an app. So he wrote a book that is an app. I don't know how you say that. He created an app that's like a book. And it's about leaving school. And that idea of what does it look like if you're leaving school? It's okay to leave school. And so a lot of information in there, and it's geared towards teens. And he has just now released it as a book that he wrote. now I know the verb to use. So that's one possible link to get that. And I'm sure it's available through many other as well. And the app, when it first came out, was actually, I think it might have been free or close to. So if listening is more your thing, then I believe it's still available. So I wanted to make sure those were available for everyone. And with that, I'm going to wish those watching later a happy holiday season, and I'm going to end the recording.